Let's just start with this. I mean, wow. When the very people building this technology, we're talking leaders at OpenAI, Google DeepMind, when they're the ones warning that it poses a risk on par with nuclear war, you know the conversation has hit a whole new level.
So, today, we're going to try to cut through all that noise. Artificial intelligence. Is it this world-saving utopia we've been promised, or is it a world-ending catastrophe waiting to happen? To figure that out, we're going to break down the core technology, dive into the global power struggle, and look at what the data actually says about its impact right now. All right, first up, we have to get our heads around the two giant narratives that are just dominating the AI debate. It really feels like we're caught between these two massive extremes: the unbelievable promise of what AI could do for all of us, and the profound, even existential peril it might represent. Now, at the very heart of all the hopes and all the fears is this one idea: artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And look, this is not the kind of AI we use every day, like a translation app or a chess program. AGI is the big one. It's the hypothetical goal of a machine that can reason, plan, learn from experience, basically do any cognitive task a human can, and maybe even better. The pursuit of AGI is what makes this whole conversation so incredibly urgent. And this, right here, lays out the incredible stakes. On the one hand, you have the potential to cure diseases, to tackle climate change, absolutely game-changing stuff. But on the other hand, the risks are just as huge: mass job displacement, authoritarian control, and yes, even human extinction. It's this tension that is at the very core of the entire AI debate. So you might be asking, why is all this happening right now? Well, a huge part of the answer is a technological breakthrough called the transformer architecture. See, before transformers, AI models processed information sequentially, kind of like reading a sentence one word at a time. But transformers, they use something called a self-attention mechanism. It lets them look at an entire chunk of data, like every single word in a paragraph, all at once, and figure out how each part relates to every other part. That ability to grasp context, that's what has supercharged AI and made AGI feel closer than it's ever been before. Okay, so when you have a technology this powerful, it naturally brings up a massive geopolitical question. Who is going to be in charge of it? This isn't just a technical race anymore. It's a full-on global race for influence and control. And this question of control, it is critical. Is development going to be led by private companies, racing for innovation? Or will governments have to step in and manage the risks? Or maybe, just maybe, could some kind of international alliance emerge? The answer is going to fundamentally shape what our future looks like. The RAND Corporation actually outlines 4 possible futures here. In one, U.S. companies just keep leading the way with a pretty light regulatory touch. In another, the U.S. government, fearing a catastrophe, basically nationalizes AI development. Think of a modern-day Manhattan Project. Scenario 3 is a Chinese surprise, where its state-led approach allows it to just leapfrog everybody. And finally, you could have a global consortium that forms to manage AI development together. Each one of those paths leads to a very, very different world. And you know what? We can already see the world's major powers heading down these different paths. The US, so far, has been pretty cautious, really trying to prioritize innovation. China is taking a very state-driven, vertical approach, creating specific laws for specific technologies as they pop up. And then you've got the European Union, which has gone in a completely different direction. Yeah, the EU's AI Act is by far the most comprehensive framework we've seen. It uses this risk-based pyramid. At the very top, you have AI systems with unacceptable risk. Think things like social scoring, and those are banned outright, gone. Below that, you have high-risk systems, like AI used in critical infrastructure or law enforcement, and those face super strict requirements for safety and transparency. It's a really proactive, top-down model that is just worlds apart from the US approach. Okay, so we've talked about the far-out future and global politics. But let's bring this conversation back down to earth for a minute. What is the actual measurable impact of AI on the economy right now? I think the biggest fear for a lot of people is mass unemployment. It's a really powerful and, frankly, persuasive story. But what happens when we stop reading the headlines and actually look at the labor market data? Well, a recent Yale study looked at this exact question, and the conclusion is pretty revealing. It turns out that while the mix of jobs is changing a bit, the shift isn't dramatic at all. And get this, the trend may have started before tools like ChatGPT even went mainstream. And you can see it right here in the data. The percentage of the workforce in jobs with high, medium, or low exposure to AI has stayed remarkably stable, even since ChatGPT's launch. So far, there is just no evidence of a mass exodus from the jobs that AI is supposedly about to make obsolete.
So here's the bottom line. There is a huge gap between the dramatic story of AI-driven job loss and what the economic data is actually showing us. The reality, at least for now, is a lot less disruptive than all the predictions. And that brings us to our final section. Because if the data doesn't fully back up the hype, then why is the story we tell ourselves about AI so extreme? We kind of need to deconstruct the narrative itself, right? Why are we so drawn to these epic tales of utopia on one side and apocalypse on the other? And maybe more importantly, who benefits from framing the entire conversation in these terms? It's really a question about psychology, politics, and power. Researcher Eric Salvaggio makes this fantastic point about how the very words we use shape the debate. Think about it. Because somebody, decades ago, called it intelligence, we can't help but compare it to a human mind. And that immediately leads to these wild conversations about consciousness and rights. But what if that's just the wrong metaphor to begin with? The language used in policy circles is also really carefully chosen. You hear terms like safety and responsibility all the time. And that's because they're useful. They create common ground. But focusing on them can also be a really convenient way to avoid the tougher, more political conversations about who really holds the power here, how corporate interests are shaping these tools, and who is actually accountable for the real-world harm they cause. And I love this analogy of the Chevrolet Corvair. It was a real product with a real design flaw that caused real harm, and it led to real regulations. Instead of just speculating about some hypothetical superintelligence in the future, this forces a much more grounded question. Are today's AI companies being held responsible for the safety of their products right here, right now? So, what a journey, huh? We've gone from the incredible promise of AGI to the existential peril it might pose. We've seen the global race to control it, we've examined the economic data that grounds us in reality, and we've even picked apart the very stories we tell about this technology. And all of that leaves us with one final thought. Maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of getting lost in speculation about whether a machine can truly think, the more urgent question is about power and purpose. Who is designing these systems? What values are they embedding in them? And who will ultimately benefit from the way these systems shape our world? Now that is the conversation we really need to be having.